Hi, my name is Dr. Rhonda Hull. A few days ago, I was wandering around the internet, listening to interviews of people who had experienced near-death experience because I myself had a near-death experience when I was 17. I stumbled across several interviews and presentations offered by an incredible man named Jeffery Olsen. Jeff Olsen is a best-selling author who inspires audiences internationally with his intriguing story of perseverance and strength. After a horrific automobile accident took the lives of his wife and his youngest 14-month-old son, also inflicting multiple life-threatening injuries to Jeff himself, including the amputation of his left leg, he found the courage somehow to physically and emotionally survive all of that, including having his near-death experiences. And he has come back from those experiences and evolved to be a huge contribution in both his career and his community. But what I find most endearing about meeting Jeff for the first time in this interview was that what he regards as his proudest accomplishment are as being a husband, a father, and a friend. And so I am incredibly grateful to bring you this interview. Now, I intended to edit this interview down to be about 30 minutes and have a pre-conversation with Jeff followed by the official interview. But we just got off to a start that included where the two just kind of melded, and rather than edit it much, I just decided to offer you all of the raw footage. So it is a bit longer than I had intended, and I am hoping that you will find it of great value as I did. Thank you so much. Enjoy. Alrighty, thank you.
Awesome. So Rhonda, your first question about how have I taken my work and created something to sustain me? I haven't. I have not done that. I still work full time. I have a job, and
Right.
That's what pays the bills. I would love to do spiritual work full time, and although I bring in some extra income from that, there's also something in my psyche that loves it not being about the money. You know, it's like I'm sustained. I have a job. I collect a paycheck. Therefore, I can reach out. I can do things. I can give of myself without saying how many butts are in the seats and how much are we paying per ticket. And
right. Well, I think that's probably the after effect of having had a near-death experience is that you get that it's not about the money, and yet when you're in this reality, to some degree, it is. And I haven't quite mastered that one.
Yeah, nor have I. I mean, I have mastered it, and I've mastered it by saying, you know what, I'm going to work 50 hours a week, and then the other hours I can give of myself freely without worrying about the money. I still, in my heart of hearts, say, gosh, wouldn't it be cool if I didn't have to go to work every day? You know what I mean?
Right.
So it isn't that I'm completely content with that. And I always do look for ways to say, what if I was doing spiritual work 24/7? And I have selected a job. I'm with a small television network that's rebranding, redoing all the content. We're in the process of literally producing 27 television shows,
Wow.
which is no small matter. So I work very hard, but I do feel like the network is value-based. It's for families. It's good, entertaining content without without all the controversial sex, drugs, rock and roll. Not that there's anything wrong with that either, but this is something that your little ones could watch and you wouldn't have to worry about, okay, are they being exposed to things I'd rather they not at the tender age of 8.
Make Mr. Rogers proud.
Yeah, so anyway, so that works for me. That works for me. However, I'm very committed and my passion is doing this work. And I'll touch on that briefly too. When I say this work, you having had the near-death experience and me having had my near-death experience and realizing that this is all a bit of a grand illusion, that the reality is maybe in the other realm and this realm is a game.
Yeah.
or a stage. And
You know, you mentioned that it's a game. It's where, as I was going back to my near-death experience along the way, trying to integrate it, it's where I kind of described it as most people come in and they are issued the game of Monopoly with the rules to the game of Monopoly. And I came in and I was issued the rules to the game of life, playing the game of Monopoly.
yes,
And I wondered, like, why doesn't it work? Why doesn't it work? Then when you realize, oh, it's about, can you play the rules of the game of Monopoly with integrity, knowing the rules of the game of life?
yeah.
So that's how I describe the game. It's that.
I love that. That's a beautiful analogy. And I think for me, now my near-death experience was at age 33. So I was a little older than you. I was still young. But yeah, life didn't make sense. And it's like, how can it all be okay? How can there be no right and wrong? There just is. How is there nothing but love and no judgment,
Right.
in a realm where everything's judged and everything, is about money and all so yeah, I think that one of the reasons I waited so long to write my book, and in fact, I had no intention of ever writing a book. I was approached by a publisher, is why I even considered it. But it took me literally a decade to process it all. It really did. It's like, how do I make sense of this? Even religion didn't make sense.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
life didn't make sense. And the crazy thing now that I have gray hair,
Yes.
and it works, right? It looks great on you. It makes me look old, but it looks good on you. Um, I've realized, gosh, maybe it is just one realm. Maybe I've spent so long saying that realm, this realm, that
Right.
realm, this realm. And I've had a huge platform in this realm saying, look, we've got to get over us and them. Let's become we. And
Yeah.
just recently I thought, well, wow, what if that realm was this realm? What if we created heaven right here? What if we went around being love? What if everyone mattered and it changed the whole consciousness? And what if we did step into that oneness, which I experienced so profoundly in my near-death experience, and we created that right here? And so that's where I'm at with that.
Well, yes, and what I know, so many people, like, the challenge is, and part of my message has been that you can be happy regardless of your circumstances.
Mhm.
And that I've discovered by walking with my grandnephew when he was barely 2 through the cancer journey, and he's 15 now and still here, but many of the kids are not. And I know the the impact of that, but walking with him through that journey. I have an autistic grandson who actually now is in a place called Heritage in Provo, up,
Oh,
up
okay.
by where you are. Um, that walking the really difficult, or even at this end of, I don't think people are really afraid of death as much as they are afraid of what I went through 3 weeks ago in the hospital, and what you went through after having had your near death experience, and you're back in a body that's not in the same form that it was.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, death is easy. Living
yeah,
life is a
that's
challenge.
exactly the point. So how do we make the best of it when it is intolerable? Because I know one of the things that I go through, or it seems intolerable, what I go through now is I'm just like sitting around waiting for my opportunity not to be here. Sometimes it feels like.
I,
So
I can relate to that as well. Yeah.
yeah. So I didn't mean to interrupt, but that whole couple of things you've said along the way are part of those bubbling questions. That whole thing too of where so many people, including myself, I mean, I was raised Catholic, and then my grandfather was Mormon. So it was that Mormon Catholic merge that happened. And from my near death experience, it really, from where I was going to go enter the convent, it became the all paths lead to the same spot. So why sweat the small stuff? It takes me back to my
Yes.
friend Richard Carlson.
Yeah. No,
Um,
it's funny. My current wife, Tanya, is a good Catholic girl from Minnesota. And we laugh. We're like, gosh, between our Mormon background and, my Mormon background and her Catholic background, we've got enough guilt. We've got enough guilt in our consciousness.
yes, exactly. Exactly. So
Yeah.
it's, how do you maneuver the difficult times here and see those as the option to see heaven on earth, or heaven, the merging of the two realities?
That's a very deep question, and I speak on this, and yet I still sometimes have my bad days, and Tanya, my wife, will put her arm around me and say, Jeff, you teach this stuff, because I'll say, hey, this is for the expansion of our soul. We chose it. Now, here's the interesting thing that shifted for me in the near-death experience, because I grew up believing, and I use that word consciously. It's a belief. Beliefs can change, but I believed that life was a test, that God had designed it for me and had sent me here, and had imposed the challenges upon me to see how I would react, to see if I would get through it. Now, in the near-death experience, what really shifted for me as I was in the arms of what I call God was that I had created it, that I was completely accountable for my life, that the universe loved me so much, that everything that happens to me was my creation for my soul's expansion. Therefore, there was nowhere to blame, there was nowhere to point fingers,
Right.
and that life in the end was not a test, but was an absolute gift. It
Right.
was a beautiful, beautiful gift. Now,
Now, if you don't mind, very briefly, it's like I recognize you had your near-death experience, you lost. I'll let you tell your very brief
oh,
version
that's okay. Yeah.
of your story, so that people kind of understand where you're coming from, and how, when you went back to recognizing that point where you had a choice, so that when you had the visitation with your youngest son who passed,
Mm-hmm.
that you could exercise that choice. So if you could kind of fill people in.
Yeah. Okay. I'll do that briefly. And since you mentioned that, to me, there's only one cosmic rule. There's only one cosmic law, and that is free will. We get to choose in everything. We are the creators of our own life. We
Right.
are the creators of our existence, even though we don't always count on what happens, and these things come in what seems like such a surprise. We still have the ability to choose how we will experience it. But yeah, what happened to me is I was in a horrible automobile accident. Um, it took the life of my wife and youngest son at the scene. I knew at the scene of the accident that they were deceased, and that
You were
was
33 at that time, right?
33 years old. My wife was 30, and my young son was 14 months old. And then my 7-year-old was in the car, and he survived the accident as well. He's a grown man now. He's 29, and they just made an offer on a house last weekend. He's married, and anyway, that has gone on.
Yeah.
But at the time, here I had this child, 7-year-old, my wife and my youngest son, who was a toddler. They're gone at the scene, and I'm still conscious. I'm aware of the fact that they've been killed. I've got a hysterical 7-year-old in the back seat that I cannot get to. I couldn't move. I was pinned in the car. I had to be extricated from the car. What had happened is both of my legs were crushed and shattered. The left leg was amputated above the knee. My right leg still has 6 pins and a plate holding it together. My right arm was nearly torn off. My rib cage was damaged. My lungs were collapsing. My spine had been damaged. However, the spinal cord was not damaged. I still had full movement, or at least have somewhat full range of movement today. And then the seatbelt had cut through my lower section and had ruptured all my insides and had torn me wide open, even to the point that my femoral artery was exposed, but by some miraculous thing was not damaged. Otherwise, I'd have bled out at the scene and I would have been gone as well. But for all intents and purposes, the accident killed me too. I left my body at the scene of the accident in that absolute dark moment when I knew Tamara, my wife, was gone. I knew Griffin was gone. I knew Spencer was okay because he was crying, and it was that cry that a father recognizes as he's hurt, but he's okay,
Right.
And anyway, in that dark moment, I left my body. I went into another realm. Interesting enough, I met Tamara there, my wife, who I knew was deceased, but there she was, beautiful, gorgeous, and yet she was emphatic that I must come back. Now, even in that was a choice. She was emphatic. You've got to go. But I learned about choice, because here I was looking at the woman I loved more than life, but I knew I had a little boy crying in the backseat of that car. And that was the first poignant moment when I knew, wow, in every moment is a choice, and the choice is up to me. I get to choose. Anyway, I came back, and in doing so, found myself wondering about the hospital. I had been extricated from the car. They had rushed me to a local hospital that could not handle my injuries. I was then life flighted to a level 1 trauma center. I knew nothing of this except that I had left my body. I had said the most profound goodbye I would ever say. And then I was in the hospital. Wow, seeing the doctors, the nurses, the patients, the families of patients, and yet seeing them and experiencing them in such a way that I knew everything about them. It's like that veil was gone. This is when I realized we're all divine beings. It didn't matter, what they did or hadn't done. Everything from the heroin addict to the saintly grandmother were absolutely beautiful. And I was feeling the magnificence of who they were and their life's experience. And I finally came upon a man or a body laying on the gurney that I didn't feel anything from, and stepped closer to look because I thought that was strange. Gosh, I'm feeling such profound connection. I'm literally experiencing oneness with everyone but him. And I stepped forward and looked, and that's when I realized, oh, that is me. That's my body. But it wasn't me. I was having this connected oneness experience, and that was the flesh suit that had been what I had been going about mortality in. And I made the choice to get back in. Now, I was in the hospital for almost 6 months. I had 18 surgeries in total, to put me back together. I was in ICU, back and forth, in and out of ICU. I threw pulmonary emboli that lodged in the lungs. I had intense infections. It was horrific.
And how did you deal with grief going through all of that? I mean, grief and you were saying the guilt of I was the one who was driving,
Yeah, I was driving the car.
Catholic Mormon thing, it's kind of, you got it.
Well, and here again, I mean, yeah, having been a believer, I thought, well, gosh, where was God when I crashed the car? How possibly, and I was sober, I was going the speed limit. My best recollection is I may have just dozed off slightly and then swerved and then overcorrected and lost control of the car. Right. But it was horrible. I'm like, how could God do this? This is too much for me to bear. I can't handle this. I had been taught God will never give you more than you can bear. And I thought, that's nonsense. This is more than I can bear.
Yeah, like Mother Teresa says, God never gives you more than you can handle. I only wish you didn't trust me so much.
That's right. and I was in that process of how could God do this? It was him. I refer to him. That was my upbringing, I mean. Right. And it wasn't till the end of my hospital stay, and quite honestly, and I should touch on that, I was given a lot of morphine early on, and that was my escape from the grief. In fact, they gave me I could hit that button and get a hit of morphine, and I had never really been on drugs, neither recreational or otherwise, and yet here, I was in intense physical pain, but I'll be honest, I would hit that button for the emotional release and escape from the grief of, oh my gosh, what just happened? How could this possibly be?
Right.
Now, it was at the end of my hospital stay, and I should also point out that the two profound near-death or out-of-body experiences were at the scene of the accident, before any of the morphine. And then at the very end of my hospital stay, when I was off of any narcotics, I was simply taking some Tylenol. And I was only a week or so from coming home. I was still really banged up. The leg was amputated. My right leg was in a brace. My right arm was in a brace. They were attempting to get the nerves regenerated so I would have some use of my right arm. But I was, my lungs had healed, the pneumonias had been overcome, the pulmonary emboli had been, dissolved and released. And so I was functioning, and I was actually in the rehabilitation wing of the hospital when I went to sleep, and I was finally able to roll on my side. I always share this part because it's just with the abdominal injuries, which because of the infection, they'd had to leave open for months. I was finally at a point where they had stabilized those and I could lay on my side and sleep on my side. And my younger brother was there. He was teasing me because I'd laid so long on my back that I'd rubbed all the hair off the back of my
Yeah.
head. And my brothers were incredible during this whole thing. But anyway, I fell asleep and I had the same sensation I had felt at the accident, this release, this lifting, I left my body again. And this time I was alone. I didn't see Tamara, but Tamara was my wife who had passed away, but I felt so joyful to be home. It was that home, people say heaven,
Right.
the other side.
Yeah.
I was home,
Home.
and I can't stress what a physical, and I know that sounds so weird because I was out of the body, but it was such a sensual experience. I could feel the ground under my feet. I began to run, which I knew I wouldn't be running in this realm, but in that realm I was running. I could feel, if it were, the energy, the light, the intelligence in every cell of my body, but I wasn't in the body. It's very difficult to explain, but I could feel everything at a much greater sensation, and I was so happy to be there. And yet I also got the knowing that I wasn't there to stay. And about that same time, there was this corridor off to my left, and I knew intuitively I'm to go down that way. And so I did. I mean, I call it the corridor. It wasn't necessarily a tunnel. It was like a corridor. It was like a structure. Like I could go down this way, and I knew to go there. And at the end of the structure, I found a crib, which Griffin, my son who had passed, was still in a crib as a toddler when we lost him. And I rushed to the crib and looked, and there he was. And he was beautiful. He was absolutely fine. And I swept him up. And I even have to stress the sensation of that. Have you ever picked up a sleeping child?
Mm.
The weight and the heat. And here I picked up my little boy, and I could feel him against me. And I could feel his breath on my neck. And I leaned in, and this may sound strange too, but I smelled his hair.
Yeah.
And there's just something about, what I knew it's him, and he's okay. And I was experiencing it in such a physical or sensory way. And anyway, as I held him, and I was weeping, I felt this presence come up behind me, which I call God. It was just this overwhelming presence. And mind you, I had been raised in that, what conservative Christian guilt, like, gosh, I began to feel guilty. I crashed the car. My little boy's here. His life was cut short because I lost control and crashed. Oh my gosh, and here comes God, and I'm in trouble.
Right.
And I remember having the thought as this presence became so close, moving closer and closer. I'm holding my little boy, and I had the thought, I hope I can be forgiven somehow, And as I had that thought, and this almost felt physical too, I'm holding my child, and these divine arms wrap around and hold us. And suddenly all that overwhelming power became nothing but unconditional love. And I mean absolutely unconditional.
Mm-hmm.
There was so much love. And I realized how much I loved my little boy. And in those divine arms, I became that little boy. I was that loved and that cherished and that divine and that perfect. And that, it was,
Right.
And I did have the life review. I began to see my life, but I began to see my life as a gift, not as a test. And even things would come up and I'd think, oh, no, that was a mistake. I didn't mean to do that. Or, ooh, I knew that was wrong, but I did it anyway. And this divine being was communicating, that's your judgment of it, not ours. We have no judgment. You're absolutely perfect to us. Everything's in divine order. And that's when I got the realization, or the download, if you will, that I had created my life. And even Tamara and Griffin, who had left, loved me enough to support my creation, that we were never really separated. We were all playing our role in this intense experience for the expansion of my soul, and the entire universe loved me so much that they absolutely supported it. And it was mind-boggling, and yet so it made so much sense. It was as if I wasn't learning it, I was remembering it. Oh yes, Oh yes, I remember. I remember.
Right.
And I know I've rambled on a bit, but I was given the opportunity in that sacred time frame to make some choices, and I was told that I could be angry at God or the universe or whatever you want to call it for the rest of my life because of what had happened. I could beat myself up
Hmm.
because I was driving the car, or I could exercise my will. And this is where the whole download came, that there's only free will,
Right.
and that I could even give my son to God. I mean, I knew somehow where intuitively I couldn't bring him back. That was done. That was all had already happened, but that I could release him and give him back and exercise my will in the situation. And that became somewhat healing. And in all that love and peace, I was able to kiss my little boy and hand him back. And then, then I came back to the hospital bed and the injuries and all that was going to take place, but with a little different perspective. But it took me 10 years. I mean, I couldn't process it. I'm like, what just happened?
How did your older son do with the whole conversation of death? And I mean, I know how the story about your homecoming
Yeah,
was so touching.
yeah.
But I know that he had his own experience of being in the car, his own trauma, his own loss of his mom and his brother,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, he's an incredible individual. He didn't have a near-death experience. He never had a dream. He was my biggest supporter and my hero when he was young. As he got older, um, in fact, when he was about 19 or 20, and he was away at college. I mean, I had remarried. We'd adopted two boys. We had rebuilt this family, but yeah, he had all the trauma I did with no experience. And he came to me and said, Dad, in fact, it's in my book, Knowing, is my latest book, Knowing. And you can get it on Amazon. It's easy to download or get a hardback or a paperback, whatever you'd
right,
like.
right,
And it tells much of his journey, which is far more profound than mine, because he didn't have anything happen. And he came to me in his young adulthood and said, Dad, I never had anything. I never had a dream. I never had an experience. I never, and he became emotional, and he's a big 6'2" guy now. And
yeah.
he's like, Dad, I prayed every day. I was a little boy. I asked God every night, can I just feel my mom? Can I
Mhm.
just see her somehow, some way, somewhere? Can I have a dream? Can I just have a message? Is there any kind of sign? And he said, Dad, I got nothing. I got nothing. So he said, either you're deceived in some crazy way, or you're making it up.
Yeah.
Or he says, if there is some greater power, some plan, some source, he said, it doesn't care about me, because I
Mhm.
was a little boy and I poured my heart out to what I thought was God every night, and nothing ever happened. And that was interesting. You know, I went home that night and I still pray. I'm like, look, I'll give it all up. I'll give everything I have. I'll give it away if he can have something, anything. Let him feel something. And
Right, that whole bargaining.
yeah, it's silly to bargain with source, but I did. And yet it's funny. And I don't profess to talk to God every day, but on this occasion, I got a profound answer. And it was interesting, because what God said was, why are you judging your son and his experience? That whole judge not, that we be not judged. He's like, what makes you think your experience is better than his? What makes you think that you, having had the out of body or near death experience or dreams or visions, is better than him having nothing? Don't you know I've got him? Don't you know that his journey is perfect for him and yours is perfect for you, and they don't have to look anything alike to be absolutely
Right.
spot on for your soul's expansion?
And maneuvering
And
free will is tricky. It's like
yeah,
the Rolling Stones had it right when they said you don't always get what you want, but you always get what you
what
need.
you need. Yeah. Well, and see, Spencer was playing in a rock band at the time. And I mean, some of the guys were in trouble. I think a couple of them went to jail. I mean, I thought my son's going to end up in jail, and I always go to the worst case scenario. And God said that would be perfect for him.
Right.
Then that would be his journey. He said, Dad, your job is to love him unconditionally. You know, do you not get that? It's the unconditional love that's the most powerful force in the universe. And so I stepped aside and honored his journey instead of trying to change it or fix it or give mine away in trade of. And he is the most deep, compassionate, loving, powerful man I know. And he doesn't necessarily, you know, he's like, I'll be God's hands. I'll be God's love here. If that let me down as a little boy, I'll be that. I'll step in and be that.
Right.
So that, you know, so that some other little child somewhere isn't wondering, where's my support, and having it never come, you know.
Wow.
He's incredible. So yeah, I mean, you have to read about the whole journey in the book, but anyway, he had his challenges, he had his struggles, he had his doubts. We all do, and that's what makes it interesting. I often compare it, and this is a bad sports analogy, so forgive me, but I used to play football. That's how I got through college. I got a scholarship, and that got me off the farm and got me an education.
Right.
And you know, gosh, the coach would sit and draw up the play on the whiteboard or chalkboard every day. Here's what we're going to do. Here's what it looks like. Here's what to expect. And we'd all say, that's great. You know, every play was a touchdown or stopped at the line of scrimmage, depending on which side of the ball you were on. And we could go into a lot of analogies about which side of the ball are we standing on. We're all right.
Right.
You know, nobody's doing anything they feel is wrong. We're all doing what we think is right. But the key was, it was easy to look at it on the chalkboard or the whiteboard, but until we played the game, you know, until you smelled the grass, you got knocked down, and
right,
and you realized how fast, you know, a 4.40 is, you would never know. And I think life's that way. I think I believe we've always existed. We've existed eternally, and that's the sense I got in the experiences, that I had always existed. I was eternal. I mean, in many ways, I say I was held in the arms of God, but it's almost like I became God. Suddenly I had this perspective, and I was eternal. And if that's the case, then we drew it up on the chalkboard and said, yeah, that sounds great. Let's go do that.
Right.
And then we got here forgetting and thought, oh my gosh, life sucks. You know, that doesn't.
Yeah, it's the good news, bad news. The good news, bad news that says, you know, I think for me, it was that moment of, oh, you know, life is so challenging, like, and then it's, well, life is eternal, and it's the good news, bad news of, oh, life is eternal. Oh, life is eternal.
Yeah, I mean, we're gonna keep doing this.
I attend Unity Church here in Port Townsend,
yes,
where I live, and at the end of every service, David, who platforms at our service, he will say, you know, and may we see it in our lifetime. And I kept like, when is that going to happen? When are we going to see it? How can I create it in this lifetime? And it's, well, life is marked by the first breath and the last breath, the human life, but life is eternal. And so if you are part of that energy, by the very nature of energy, it's change, it has a pulse. So just because you and I had these certain experiences that are perceived to be on the other side, it is all about the compression of all of these layers of experience that we have to be unconditional love and to become that energy. But that energy itself will change because life is eternal. Life is, so
it's always evolving. I saw a funny comic strip the other day, and I thought about this in many ways, because you know, there are days I'll go out and I'm watching a sunset and the birds are out there fluttering, and even with the challenges of life, I think, gosh, this is pretty darn good. You know, I mean, this is not so bad. But the comic strip was this fellow, and he's come through the pearly gates, and he's looking at his creator, and the creator says, how was your trip to heaven? You know, meaning this is it. Up there, we'll probably get bored. Maybe that's the locker room with the chalk when we're like, put us in the game, coach. Put us in the game. We want to go, you know, we want to go experience it again for ourselves. You know, and in many ways, maybe that's what it is. I believe that this oneness, that we are all divine beings, that we are God, experiencing our individual processes, in some weird cosmic universal whole. And I think that is the game we're playing, is when will we finally reach into unconditional love and stop classifying and segregating and simply become one, where everyone's taken care of, everyone matters. I mean, I believe there's resources enough now that we wouldn't have to kill each other or have people starving to death or,
Yes.
have all the turmoil that we create. And I think if we chose to stop doing that and do it differently, this might become heaven. We might be saying, hey, heaven's right here. It's a pretty good place.
Yeah, I think we all assume we play from the life from the perspective that we're all experiencing the same reality, and our life often is spent trying to coerce people to see life from our perspective. And it's not easy, and I really do believe, like even politically, it's hard to comprehend it and to say, well, what used to be in the dark is now being brought out to be healed. And
Yes.
so it's a stretch, but it's to see that there is purpose and surrender it to that. And is there a way that we can find the common ground and stand on the common ground, accepting that we all have different realities that we're living, but can we find the common ground, that unconditional love,
Yeah.
and see that in this very oftentimes distorted reality?
Yeah.
And it's
I love
oftentimes
that.
easier imagined than experienced.
Right. Yes. True. Yeah. And yet it's not a stretch. Everything serves the higher good. I mean, I'm stepping into a mode where everything is love. Everything comes from the light. It's just how we deal with it. I mean, we're taught, and I say we're, like almost universally. I mean, I'll talk about our country here in the United States. Gosh, political parties, absolutely, separate, conflicting. Genders have been absolutely conflicting. Race has been absolutely conflicting. Religion has been, everything. I mean, even, and here's where I'll go out on a limb, but even the Bible, which many world religions embrace as holy writ, it seems to teach that there's a favored people, a covenant people, a God has a preference, and the other people don't matter,
Right.
Even within families, well, he's the chosen son, and, the other one doesn't matter. And then there's all the tricks, well, Jacob and Esau, and they tricked the old man so that,
Right.
the whole thing is like, my gosh, everything is dividing us, segregating us and them, and there's very few things that say we. And I think if we put all that aside, even in this country, if in some miraculous twinkling of an eye we said, you know what, I'm not going to be any political party. Let's come together, as you say, on common ground, and let's decipher what can heal this
Right.
humanity in this part of the world. And then maybe from that, we can ripple that out to heal humanity in other parts of the world. And just maybe that common ground is the place where we find peace, where we find wholeness and oneness, and it shifts everything. Everything changes,
Right.
Yeah.
And it's that what if, being able to imagine possibilities rather than focus on what's not working, like what is working.
Yeah.
And for me, it's the ongoing question of, I was sent back, chose to come back, however you see it, to be a bridge person, to be able to convey what unconditional love is. And I mean, I'm a writer. I am very loquacious. That experience renders me speechless. It's like you just cannot find the words to convey what that feeling is. And yet it's what you want to share or embody, so that by embodying it, you can hold the space for those people when they're scared, when they're hurt, when they're confused.
I love Rhonda, you're hitting the nail right on the head. I mean, you really are. And many times it feels like to me I was sent back. My friends tease me. They say, you're the only guy we know that got kicked out of heaven, you know.
Yeah.
But yes, words are difficult, but I came back with this burning cause. You know, it's like, gosh, I tried for years to articulate that. I've done the best I can by saying I am a manifestation. I'm literally a manifestation of that divine unconditional love. And by being that, perhaps I can bring forth truth and clarity and oneness in such a way that we finally have peace and abundance, you know, in a way that we haven't experienced before. Right. Even if it's personal. I mean, I used to wonder about miracles. I wanted water turned to wine, you know, and now I can hardly go outside. You know, I mean, every sunrise is a miracle. Every little flower is a miracle. I mean, every time, you know, my wife's foot touches my foot in bed, that's a miracle. It's a blessing to be alive. And the challenges that come is because they're going to be there every day.
Right.
Those are gifts too. I mean, I might get cut off on the interstate. Gosh, I feel the anger come up and I want to holler at this guy or gal or whatever. And now I can kind of say, thank goodness I'm alive. Isn't it cool to feel all the emotions, right, joy, right, fear, anger, you know, guilt. I mean, I was trying to put it into an analogy recently, and I said, I think we bought the ticket to the full feature film, you know, and we want
the IMAX. It's the IMAX.
The IMAX. We want the popcorn and we want the drink, but you know what? The floor is going to be sticky and there might be gum under the chair, but that's all part of the experience. So embrace it and just say, thank God I'm alive. Thank God I'm having the experience, because otherwise, how would my soul ever know? And as we do evolve or progress or even remain eternal, we'll bring more and more with this and say, well, I know because I experienced it, therefore it's a part of me. And at the bottom line, I believe it's empathy. Therefore, I can have empathy for others because I've walked that journey, you know, and I can walk with them without judgment, without comparisons, but in pure, true, unconditional love.
Yeah, I always kind of remind myself, go back to the phrase of be open to everything and attached to nothing.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, it's like having an expectation is what creates suffering.
Yeah.
So, you know, life is painful.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of our suffering that sometimes gets attached to going through a painful time, or that is separate from a painful time, but we're just suffering, that it is because we're holding an expectation, and it's self-induced suffering.
I read something like that. It said something about that pain is going to happen, but suffering is optional. You know, I can't remember what it said. I probably butchered it, but I mean, we are going to have challenging things. That's part of the experience. And for me, I mean, when I was laid in the hospital all those months asking why, you know, why me? Why both of them? Why the leg? Why? It wasn't until I shifted the why questions to what questions. What can I do with this? What have I been given? What do I still have? Instead of focusing on what I'd lost, you know. But, you know, Spencer, gosh, I still had this little boy who was counting on his dad, you know, and there's always, you know, life is painful, but it's also joyful. And a lot of it depends on how we look at it and how we choose. And I'll emphasize choice, how we choose to experience it.
Yeah. And how, you know, so many, I know so many people. I wrote a book called Drive Yourself Happy, and encouraged by my friend Richard Carlson, who wrote Don't Sweat the Small Stuff. And, you know, to me, it was still, when I look back, you know, when you've written a book, like for you, how long ago did you write your book?
Oh, gosh. Well, I wrote the first book 7 years ago. And then, you know, the publisher said, do another one. I thought my mother would buy a copy. I didn't know it would hit the top 3 on Amazon in the first week. I was, you know, it was nuts. And so, yeah, it's been a few years, and then that Knowing, which just came out 2 years ago, but it's the compilation of all of it, plus the extended experience, including Spencer, my son, getting married and all of that. But yeah, it's been a few years. So
Yeah, and when you go back and you read your book that you wrote a while back, you go, oh, the thread was still there, like the seed was still there, and then you see how you've expanded, or at least I saw how I've expanded and grown.
yeah.
But when you talk about happiness, it I found myself always having to say, well, it's not just the happiness that you have the car and you have the girl and you have the guy and you have the house, and it was that happiness of, regardless of all of that, like, don't shy away from the painful things. It's like, don't bring them on if you can help it, but no, have the knowing that you're
Yeah.
talking about, have the knowing that buried within those really challenging times, part of the human experience is we learn more from the bittersweet heartache part, and it's what we do with that information. So don't avoid something difficult, just look for the flower growing up in the crack in the sidewalk and notice the hummingbird that's, so it's
Yeah.
a practice, and we are still in this human form that requires the budding up of the veil of what we know
It's
on one side and what we know on the other side.
it's duality.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, no seed has ever grown without being stuck deep in the darkness of
Yeah.
the soil. I mean, it seems to be true of us. We come into this low vibrating realm so that we can grow and blossom, and we are going to blossom. I mean, you just that's the way it is.
Well, and like you say, people, energy on the other side may be seeing us as the like, oh, you're the courageous ones. Tell me more about what happened there, rather than vice versa. And even that is filtered through the human dichotomy or paradox.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful I had the experience I had, even though it makes having this one more challenging. I mean, sometimes I look at people and through that human judgment go, oh my gosh, I should have been eating potato chips and peanuts all of the time. I should have just done it unconscious and not have been so hypersensitive walking through this experience. I can't seem to numb out.
Yeah. Well, and again, it's always evolving, but I've come to a recent conclusion that perhaps everything we experience, including the near-death experience, is so that we can show up and serve others in a more profound way. I
Yeah.
mean, so we get the benefit of deepened insights, but perhaps the outcome is, when someone's struggling or they're looking for support, you may have deeper roots to say,
Right.
you know what,
Right.
lean up against me for a little bit, and we'll get through this together, right?
Well, and like you said, your older son didn't have that
Mhm.
experience, but he found his way to a profound insight.
Yeah,
So he takes a stand in his life,
yeah,
um, that still was the end product of that
yeah.
experience.
Yeah, it's really funny, I mean, and in a weird comparison, I could say, well, look to the source, and he's saying, look, I'm right here. Just come and let me love you. And I'm like, wow. What's I say? Maybe his journey is far more profound in the end than is mine. And
Yeah.
I do love that about him and about what I'm learning. This is in the book, but it's one of his friends did go to jail. There was drugs involved in the band. The band split up, and kid went to jail, and my son, and this is after, I mean, I'd had all the near-death experiences. He's like, Dad, I'm going to go my friend's hearings today, and I'm going to be with him in court. I'm going to be there. And I'm like, no, you're not. You're not going to go stand with a known drug,
Yeah.
blah, 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 blah. And this, I mean, he was young. He was just, gosh, was he even 20, maybe 20 years old? And
Right.
he said, that's how it is, Dad. Somebody screws up and you turn your back on them. If I screwed up, would you just leave me on my own? He says, Dad, I'm going to be there. I'm going to stand by my buddy. because that's what I'm here for. And maybe I'm the only one that can show him he still matters and we still love him. And I was just like, oh my gosh,
Right.
you know,
Right.
son, you're right. You're right. You take your 20-year-old, you know, agnostic wisdom, and you apply that because you're farther down the road than I'll ever be. I think he's a much older soul that actually came to guide me.
Yeah. Well, you know, that was one of the things, having been a birth doula back when, it was always welcoming this little baby and being able to look at some of them and say, this is an old soul.
Yeah.
And some of them that this is a new soul.
Yeah.
And, you know, the lesson, we learned so many lessons from our kids and our, now for me, my grandkids. And Connor, who went through cancer, has taught me so much about strength and patience. And my grandson, who experiences autism, has taught me so much about acceptance and diversity and seeing things from a different perspective. And so it's the challenging times that teach us the most. And I know when it was the night before my mom passed, and she had been alcoholic during my growing up time, and my dad had passed first. She had had multiple heart attacks. I was sitting with her the night before she passed, and I said, Mom, you know, we really do need to talk about this alcoholism thing and how it impacted me. And she could barely, it took her so much to speak because her heart was laboring so. But she said, well, you know, all I can say is I'm smarter now, and I'm sorry. And you know, time's a wasting here. I'm not sure how much time I have left. Do you want to spend it talking about the past that I can't change? All I can do is apologize. And it was like, oh shoot, she's right. Okay, we won't go there. And then the conversation would drift to, oh Mom, I so wish you could be here for, you know, my youngest daughter was about to graduate and you won't see the grandbabies. And she said, well, I will be at my daughter Dana's graduation and I'll see the grandbabies. I just won't bring my body. But time's a wasting, and all I have is now. I mean, she kept bringing me back to just be here with me now. Be here with me in all of your feelings. Just be real with me right here, right now. And so to have that gift, all of my issues about her alcoholism evaporated. 40 years of it evaporated in just that one conversation. So I feel incredibly gifted that I have been able to be open at those moments to hear the message that's being offered and receive it, you know.
No, it is beautiful. I mean, living in the now, you know, it sounds like a cliche, but boy, when you can be present in any given moment, that's when magic happens.
Yeah.
And I love that you brought babies into the world, and now you're assisting with people to pass on. I think in many ways it's much the same. Griffin, the son who passed, he was an in vitro baby. We were told we'd never have more children. Oh. He was a miracle boy. I'm like, as a father, you know, to be in that room when that baby's born, it's incredible. And he was coming into the world, and it almost felt like they were grieving on that other side to let him go, to come here, almost like, you know, I mean, I think whenever that veil parts, when someone comes into the world, and even when it parts and they go out, all that glory seems to shine in on us. We catch some of that light. And I think in this whole weird, you know, eternal round of things, they may have been grieving that he was coming to play this game, you know, and be in this experience. And yet, you know, we were celebrating on this end, and perhaps when we go, we're grieving on this end and they're celebrating on that end. You know, there's joy. There seems to be this duality, this joy and sorrow that go hand in hand and in some ways define each other. We wouldn't know the light if we didn't have the darkness, right?
Yeah, I know. Back as part of the journey of being with, initially as babies were born, and then moms who worked so hard to get pregnant, and it seemed like, you know, a teenager could go out there and get pregnant in an instant, and then somebody over here could struggle. And how does all of that make sense? And then to have those occasions sometimes where I'm working with pregnant and parenting teens for a while, and in my own, at that point, Catholic upbringing about, the right to choose, and how, yes, there were some young women who, for whatever reason, would choose to use abortion as a form of birth control. And while I knew at the same time there were those women who were struggling so hard to get pregnant, and then to experience sometimes a baby being born and dying within that same, oh, they're here, oh, they're not, to somehow know that my role is to see the purpose, because it starts a domino of awakening, whether it's a loss that we judge as good or bad, that somehow there is a process of awakening that gets triggered by whatever the experience is. Yeah. And so can I stand in non-judgment and just hold, even in my confusion, that willingness to accept that there's a blessing buried here somehow. There's something important happening that I get to be a witness of.
Yeah, no, it is. It's profound, really, in the end, when you think about it all. And I'm just recalling all those things and all those memories, and yet wondering what does tomorrow hold? And that's just it. The past is gone. The future, we have no idea. But being in that now, that's the place to be.
Yeah. Well, I am so grateful for your time. I will let you.
It's been a pleasure to speak. Well, let's stay connected. I'd love to find a way to work together and
I would love that. I would absolutely love that.
Do what we can to make some good in this world.
Yeah, and if you would share your website so that if people are looking to connect with you, they will know where to find you and your books.
Oh, awesome. Well, they can find my books on Amazon. It's Knowing by Jeffery Olsen, and that's Jeffery Olsen. I'm on all the social media platforms, and that's Jeffery Olsen. And usually my middle initial is in there. So it's Jeffery, Jeffery Olsen, Olsen. And you can find me on my website, which is Envoy Publishing, ENVOY publishing.com. Envoy is French for messenger. So
very good. It has been just a privilege and honor. I am so grateful, and I will keep in touch, because there's just more conversation to be had, and I'd love to stay connected. So thank you so much, Jeffery. Enjoy your day.
Thank you, Rhonda. Have a beautiful day.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.